Today's daf we're going to be learning is Menachot Daf Memchet. It's the daf for Shabbat. We're going to get started with the bottom of Mem Zayin Amud Bet. Tanu Rabbanan Shachat Shnei Kvasim al Arba Chalot. If you take two of the sheep, again we're talking about the two Kivsei Atzeret, the ones for Shavuot, and you slaughter them with usually 2 loaves of bread. If this time you slaughter them with 4 loaves of bread, and now the issue is you have 2 extras, what do you do with them? Moshech Shtayim Mehen Uminifan. Now, you take 2 out of the 4. Now, what we're talking about here is after the slaughtering. Okay, if you remember, there's 2 times they wave it. They waved it in the beginning. Okay, unclear. Maybe they waved all of them together, or all, both breads with the 2 sheep at 2 different points. It's unclear. But the point is, right, somehow they did all 4. Then they slaughtered. And then they now realize, we really only need 2. What do we do? So Moshech Shtayim Mehenu Minifan, you take 2 of them and you wave them. V'ashar nechalot b'pidyon, and then you redeem the other 2. Now the problem is that we're going to now go back to the machloket we saw yesterday between Rebbe and Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon as to did the shechita sanctify them. Now, let's talk basics, okay? In the beginning, you prepared this bread for the sacrifice. That's kind of like designating an animal. Okay, except it's a little different because when you designate an animal, it already has sanctity. Kedushat haguf. When you designate the bread until either the shechita or we talked about the zrika, it doesn't have sanctity of the guf yet. It only is kedushat damim that we talked about yesterday, which is only value is sanctified. So in the beginning, you designate these breads. Their value is sanctified to the temple, but they're not kedushat haguf. Question is, at what point do they become kedushat haguf? Right, so that's the machloket Rebbe and Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Now, if you assume that they're all now kedushat haguf, okay, like Rebbe, okay, which is what they're gonna now try to say, this can't possibly be like Rebbe because there's no way to deal with this according to Rebbe, okay, and that's what we're going to explain right now. So let's explain it as we go through, okay, even though I didn't really explain well enough what exactly we did here. So Amru Rabbanan Kamei de Rav Chisda. When the rabbis brought this in front of Rav Chisda, they said, Hadelo Rebbe, this can't really work according to Rebbe. Because if the slaughtering sanctified all 4 loaves, now actually it didn't sanctify all 4. It sanctified 2 out of the 4, but we have no idea which 2. So now we're stuck because every loaf, that's why I said all before, it's not really all, it's just every loaf is potentially sanctified Kedushat HaGuf. So now we're going to have a problem. Why? Well, the Rebbe, Kevanda Amar Shchita Mekacha, because he said slaughtering sanctifies them, Deparik Lehu Hecha, where exactly are you going to do this redemption, okay? And how are you going to really redeem them? Because if they're Kedusha Leguf, we learned you can't redeem them. So what we're going to do like this, if you take them all outside, let's say, if we're outside the sanctuary, we're going to now say, and you'll see in a minute, right? This is obviously not going to work. But we're either going to do it outside or inside. Either which way, it's not going to work according to Rebbe. Because if you take them outside and you say, hey, let's redeem them, right? So you wave 2 of them inside, okay? According to Tosfot, okay? Tosfot basically says we actually have to wave all 4 of them. Okay, when it says 2, it means 2 at a time. You're going to take number 1 with number 2. Number 1 with number 3, number 1 with number 4. Then you're going to take number 2 with number 3, 2 with number 4. You're going to have to try all the permutations because you really don't know which one and do them all, okay? He says otherwise it really makes no sense if you're going to explain according to Rebbe. Because once you say Rebbe, they're designated. 2 are Kedushat Guf. You have to wave those 2. So basically you're going to have, according to Tosfot, it's very hard to understand it otherwise, you're going to have to go through, all of them basically, in case those are the 2. So that's the way Tosfot reads this. And then we're going to basically say like this. If you do that, and then you want to take them all outside and say, listen, 2 of these are Kedushat HaGuf and we already waved them inside. The other 2, whichever 2, the redemption should work. Okay, I'm taking this money. This money is going to basically redeem the other 2. And now you can actually eat all the breads because the ones that were inside were waved, and then you continue with the slaughtering of the animal, and all is good. The ones that are outside, that now 2 of them were inside and were good, 2 of them are now redeemed. So you can eat them because they're just redeemed and they're not sanctified anymore. But there's one major problem, which you probably figured out already, which is if you're going to do it outside, kevan dichtiv lifnei Hashem, okay, henifa kohen Hashem at lechem abikurim tnufa, henifa tam kohen, henifa kohen otam al lechem abikurim tnufa lifnei Hashem al shnei akvasim kodesh yu Hashem lekohen. These are kodesh kodshim. They can't leave the Azara. So even though that sounded good and it was a way to possibly do it, but according to Rebbe, once they're sanctified kedushat haguf, you can't take them out. They have to stay lifnei Hashem. They have to be eaten inside. So having taken them outside, you've completely disqualified them. Okay, option 2, igavai. If you do it inside, that sounds like a better solution. We won't take anything outside. What we'll do is like this. Again, wave. Let's go with Tosfot. Each one, right, with the other. We tried all the permutations. We're covered there. Now we want to redeem inside 2 of them. And then, right, we'll basically end up permitting everything to be eaten. But there's a major problem. Hama'ayil chulin lazara. But now you're allowing chulin in the azara because now you're basically taking this item that was kedushat damim, and theoretically it could have been in the temple at this point to basically, right, it had sanctity. It was supposed to be maybe even in line to be used for the shtei alechem, for the 2 loaves. But now you're going to redeem 2 of them. And you now, we don't even know which one, but 2 out of these 4 are chulin. You can't have chulin in the azara. You're not allowed to bring in things that don't belong. So that's a problem. So it's going to have to be, right? So they basically, the rabbis say to Rav Chisda, this can't go according to Rebbe. It must be Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon. If you say Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, it makes all this more sense. They're both kadosh kedushat haguf. It's much simpler then. I'm sorry, kedushat damim. Only their value is sanctified at this point. They don't get sanctified until you sprinkle the blood, but we're before the sprinkling of the blood. So what are you going to do? Very simply. 2 you're going to waive. You're going to designate those as the 2. The other 2 still have the sanctity of kedushat damim because they were designated. You redeem it on money, and then you basically, right, you can even take them outside at that point because, right, they weren't sanctified kedushat haguf, so it's no problem. But Amar lahu Rav Chisda said, no, la'olam ki Rebbe, I'm going to explain this according to Rebbe. You'll see. Uparik lu gavai, and you can even redeem them inside. Okay, you don't do them outside. That for sure is disqualified because you're going to disqualify the 2 that are kedushat haguf. But chulin mimela kahavya, and this isn't a problem. You're not allowed to bring in chulin la'azara. But if they become chulin, that's fine. They're already in the azara. They were taken into the azara fair and square, right? They were part of this korban. So when they turn into chulin, that's not such a problem. Okay. So that's the way they explain it. So Rav Chisda comes up with a way to explain this Braita even according to Rebbe. Now, Amarle Ravina le Ravashi v'hatanya, but doesn't it say in the Braita, Kashu podan ein podan ela b'chutz? When you redeem them outside. So that seems to go against the way we just explained it according to Rebbe. To which the answer is very simple. Havadai Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon. That Braita is definitely Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon, but it doesn't mean that our Braita is. Okay, our Braita, where it explained exactly what you're supposed to do, take 2 and wave them, take the rest and eat them after you redeem them, that theoretically could be taking place inside and could be according to Rebbe. And the one that says, do it outside, that's Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon. To eat Rebbe, ha'ifsalu b'yipaslu b'yotze, because if it was Rebbe, there's no way you could redeem them outside because they'd be disqualified by removing them from the Azara. Amarle Rav Acha Berei de Rava le Rav Ashi. Now Rav Acha Berei de Rava comes to Rav Ashi and says to him, let's go back to the original Braita. Lema tavi tiyuvte de Rabbi Yochanan. We're going to use that Braita again that said you slaughtered 2 with 4 loaves. What do? Wave 2, and then the rest you can eat after you redeem them. So this seems to contradict something Rabbi Yochanan said. Mehadi itmar, from what it says here. Toda shechata al shmonim chalot. Now we're making a comparison, the shtei alechem with the breads, right? I'm sorry, the shnei kivsei atzeret, the 2 sheep with the breads, to the animal with the 40 loaves. And in our case, we did double the amount of bread. There we're going to have double the amount of loaves. And we're going to see the halacha is not the same according to Rabbi Yochanan. So if you took a toda and slaughtered it on 80 loaves instead of 40, chizki amal kadshu arba'im mitoch hashmonim, exactly like here. Half are sanctified. That looks perfect with the Braita. Rabbi Yochanan amar Lo kadshu arbi b'toch hashmonim. No, you didn't sanctify 40 out of 80. None are sanctified. V'lav mi'it marala. Wasn't it said about? Okay, so now they're going to say, no. That's not a difficulty on Rabbi Yochanan or Braita because lav mi'it marala. Wasn't it said about that statement of Rabbi Yochanan? Amar Rabbi Zera hakol mudim hechad amar likdeshu arba'im mitoch shmonim dekadshu. They both agree, Rabbi Zera said there, that they both agree, Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan, that if you said, here's 80 loaves, I'm going to slaughter my animal on 40 of the 80, it works, and then only 40 are sanctified. Well, Hachanami will say the same thing by us. That our case must be, Likadshu tarta mitoch arba. You said I'm slaughtering these animals on 2 of the 4 loaves. And then it would work, okay? Then the sanctification will work on 2 and not on 4. And now we're redefining the case a little differently than we thought. It's not much different. It's still the same ramification. We still don't know which 2. We still have to do with it everything we said. But it at least doesn't mean that this contradicts Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan would agree in that case. Okay? Even in the parallel case in the Todah. Now we're going to have another issue with Rabbi Yochanan, or discussion with him. Tani Rabbi Chanina Tirata, it seems to be a name of a place, Rashi says. Rabbi Chanina from Tirata said in front of Rabbi Yochanan, okay, or from Tira. He said in front of Rabbi Yochanan the following. He brought a braita, okay, and then Rabbi Yochanan is going to question this braita. Shachat arba'a kvasim al shtei chalot. If you slaughter 4 sheep on 2 loaves, okay, we're now switching. Instead of the 4 loaves, we now have 4 sheep instead of 2 sheep with the regular amount of loaves. Moshech shnai mehem v'zorek daman shelo lishman. You first take, before you do anything, you take 2 of them and you slaughter them shelo lishman, just as regular korbanot shlamim. She'im iyata omer kach, because if you don't say that, hifsadeta et achronim, you're going to ruin the second ones. Basically, okay, if we look at Rashi explains here what happens here. Because if you don't say that and you first slaughter the ones lishman, okay, hifsadeta et achronim, as we said before, because what did we say at the end of the previous daf? Ein lecha davar shenir'eh, this was Rabbi Zera. Ein lecha davar shenir'eh lishman v'nidchemi lishman. There isn't such a thing. If you take the 2 and do them first lishman, then the other 2 are rejects. Now, once they're rejected, you can't sacrifice them shelo lishman. So comes this braita that Rabbi Chanina brings and says, so I have a solution, the braita says. Why don't you, again, he's not a Tana, he's just quoting a braita, that the braita says the best solution is, take the first 2. They're not yet disqualified. They're not yet rejected. Take them and just slaughter them shelo lishma. Okay? Sounds like a good solution. Except what? Well, maybe slaughtering shelo lishma is not actually permitted, right? Who said you could, lechatchila, from the get-go, just go and do some shelo lishma? So that's what Rabbi Yochanan said. Amar lo Rabbi Yochanan, v'chi omrim lo la'adam, amod v'chata, b'shvil shetizkeh. Wait a minute. What's the issue? Why are you doing this? You're doing it because you don't want to waste the meat, right? What's going to happen? Well, if you take the first 2 and you slaughter them shelo lishman, you'll be allowed to eat the meat because remember, a shlamim shelo lishma is accepted. You just don't fulfill your obligation. It's fine. You have the other 2 sheep to fulfill your obligation with. Then you bring the other 2 sheep and those the kohanim can eat. So we're good, right? No meat went to waste. He's saying, wait, but we're going to let you commit a sin to allow the meat not to go to waste, right? Who says you could do a sin? No, Rabbi Yochanan says it's forbidden to take a korban that's designated as one thing and offer it up for something else. So here we have, it's designated as a korban shlamim for a shalmei atzeret for Shavuot. And you're going to now take it and slaughter it, shelo lishma, right? Just to save the meat? How it can't possibly be. And Rabbi Yochanan further proves it from bringing a Mishnah. V'hatnan, it says in a Mishnah, evrei chatat shenitaru be'evrei olah. You have pieces of meat of a sin offering, which are supposed to go to the Kohen. They're not supposed to go on the altar. But they get mixed up with pieces of the olah that are supposed to be burned on the altar, right? Because everything in the olah gets burnt. Rabbi Eliezer omer yitznu lamala. Rabbi Eliezer says, put them on the altar, all of them. V'ro'en yet basar chatat lamala ki'ilu hi etzim. And basically, even though you're not supposed to put something on the altar that's not supposed to go there, we're just going to view that meat as if it's firewood. Okay, it's just going to help your fire. He has no problem with that. But Chachamim omrim, and that's what's important for our purposes, Ti'u bar tzuratam v'yetu lebeit hasreifa. all these pieces of meat are completely disqualified. Wait till they get, right? It's a mixture anyway. So some really can go on the altar, but we don't know which ones. So leave them till they rot and then burn them on the altar or leave them overnight. Okay. And then burn them up and then burn them. Sorry, not on the altar. They have to go to the Beit HaStreifa. They get burnt. They're completely ruined. Amai. Now comes Rabbi Yochanan and says, look, if we could say, amo v'chato, right? Go sin, go do something wrong in order to fix things. Well, then we should have said, lema amo v'chato v'chata b'shvil shetizkeh. Go sin in order to make sure we don't ruin meat, right? We don't like to ruin sacrificial meat. You had good pieces of ola there, good pieces of chata there. You're now taking it and basically disqualifying it. Well, maybe we should let you sin to fix that problem. And look, we don't do that. So how could we do it in your situation, right? How could we take these extra 2 sheep and offer them shalol lishma? So what is the answer? Rabbi Hanina answers him, Amod v'chata b'chatat b'shvil shetizkeh b'chatat amrinan. Amod v'chata b'chatat b'shvil shetizkeh ba'olah lo amrinan. We don't allow you to sin with a sin offering to fix the burnt offering. What's the whole idea? We want to let you burn the burnt offering on the altar. But we can't let you take one thing to fix a completely different thing, a chata for a sin offer, for a burnt offering. But we can allow you when it's the same type. And what's our case, right? So we can take a chatat and allow you to sin with that in order to prevent a different chatat from being ruined. What's our case, right? Because again, what basically Rabbi Hanina Turata is saying, you're comparing apples and oranges. I'm comparing 2 of the same type. I want you to take a shlamim and use it as a different kind of shlamim. So I'm allowed to sin with one shlamim to save a shlamim sacrifice, but I'm not allowed to sin with a chata to save an ola. So he says, your example of your mission is not a good example. I'm back to my opinion. Now, Rabbi Yochanan asks, but bechadim, or maybe the Gemara, it's unclear if it's the Stam Gemara or Rabbi Yochanan, but he says back, it's a counter question, bechadim miltam yamrina, you just answered that within one issue, you can sin to save something else. Who says? I'm going to show you a case for Hatanya. It says in a Braita, if you have these sheep for Shavuot that you slaughtered shelo lishman, you slaughter them the wrong day, okay, the day before or the day after. The blood can be sprinkled and the meat can be eaten. Why? Because this is a classic case of you did it shelo lishma. Okay, this isn't where we told you go do it shelo lishma, but you happen to have done it shelo lishma. So we say the sacrifice is accepted. You just didn't fulfill your obligation, so you can go ahead and sprinkle the blood. The meat can be eaten. Ve'im aita Shabbat, but here comes the key. If it was Shabbat, lo yizchok. We don't allow the blood to be sprinkled. Why? Because it's forbidden to sprinkle blood on Shabbat of a korban you're not supposed to bring that day. Now, why not? Because there's 2 possibilities about what the problem is. Well, the sprinkling of the blood permits all sorts of things to happen. We've seen this many times. Permits the parts of the meat that are supposed to be burned on the altar. It permits the meat to be eaten, right? So it's a permitter. That's what we call metaken kli, right? That's the makeh patish. It's the final blow. So it's the permitter. So that's possible. Some people say it's actually coloring the mizbeach. So as one of the Menachot. So that could be the issue. Ve'im zarak. But if anyway you sprinkle the blood, then we'll allow you to burn the parts on the altar that night. Okay, so you're not supposed to do it on Shabbat, but if you did, we'll allow it. So now they're going to say, wait a minute, amai. Why don't we tell you, go ahead and sin, bring this sacrifice, sprinkle the blood on Shabbat to permit the meat or the imurim to be burned and the meat to be eaten. Right? But we don't say that, even though this is all within the same topic. We're basically allowing you to override Shabbat, or we're suggesting should be able to override Shabbat to sprinkle the blood of this sacrifice in order to permit itself, right, the meat to be eaten and the parts to be burned on the altar. So why do we only say, well, if you did it anyway, we'll let it, but why don't we just say, let's let you sin? So here comes basically Rabbi Yochanan with a counterclaim, okay, or the Gemara's counterclaim for Rabbi Yochanan. Look, we don't allow sinning just to solve some other problem, even within that same korban. So this distinction that Rabbi Hanina tried to make in order to reject the Braita that Rabbi Yochanan brought is not a good distinction because he said within one topic, of course you can sin, only in two you couldn't, and that's why it didn't work with this Ola and the Chata. To which, again, either the Gemara responds or Rabbi Hanina responds with an answer. Amod v'chata b'Shabbat kadesh tizkeh b'Shabbat amrina. We allow you to sin on Shabbat in order to allow something else on Shabbat to be permitted to you. But amod chata b'Shabbat kadesh tizkeh b'chol lo amrinan. But if you're standing there and it's Shabbat, you can't cook that meat today. So you can't, right? First of all, the imurim are only going to be burnt at night. And the eating of the meat is not allowed. You can't cook on Shabbos. So the meat is only going to be eaten later that night on Motzei Shabbat. So we don't allow you to be mechalel Shabbat for something that's not going to affect you on Shabbat itself. So that's the issue here. This has nothing to do with, right, does one thing allowed to sin in order to permit itself, because this isn't a good case like that, because this is doing malacha on Shabbos that's for after Shabbos. It's going to help you after Shabbos. If it would help you on Shabbat, then yeah, we would be allowed to do it. Okay, now the Gemara is going to question, this seems to be the Gemara now coming back, some statement that Rabbi Hanina made earlier. Rabbi Hanina basically said, and it's not exactly sure if it's a difficulty on Rabbi Hanina, but what they're saying is this. Rabbi Hanina made this distinction. He said, within the same issue, you're allowed to sin, right? Which then we questioned, but we resolved it with the Shabbos thing. And then he said, but two, no. Right? He said, I draw the line there, right? That was after Rabbi Yochanan's question. So he says, yeah, I agree with you about two things. For sure, you're not going to be allowed to sin in one to permit the other. But comes the Gemara and says, why not? Okay, this is like certainly not Rabbi Yochanan, who thinks you can't sin at all. Even Rabbi Hanina, Tirata, limited it. So now we're going to say, why limit it? Look, two different things, okay? Betarte mile lo amrina. We don't say you can sin in one in order to permit the other. Look, we're now going to have the two different things, just so you have in your mind, are going to be truma and chulin. Okay, truma, it's for kohanim only, and chulin, which are for everybody. And now we're going to see what the issue is. V'hatnan, it says in a Mishnah. Okay, it's a Mishnah in Trumot. Chavit shel truma shenishbera begat ha'elyona. I don't know if you remember the way these wine presses work, but there's the part at the top where people trample on the grapes, and then, or tread on the grapes, or there's a beam that treads on them, and then it drips down into a pit. And that's where the wine gets collected. So you have them in the upper part. Ubetachtona, and in the bottom part, you have chulin tmeim. You have chulin, which is impure. Okay? And at the top, you have a barrel of truma that basically broke in the Gad Ha'elyona. Okay, so it breaks. It starts spilling into the Gad Ha'elyona, and from the Gad Ha'elyona, it's going to trickle down to the Gad Ha'tachtona. Now, the top is truma, which is totally fine. It's pure. The bottom is chulin, which are impure. Now, chulin, which are impure, are kind of fine. I mean, there were people who were careful not to eat chulin that became impure, but there's nothing really wrong with them. Anyone can eat them. But once the truma hits the chulin, what's going to happen? The truma is going to become impure, and then it's going to be mixed in with chulin, and because it gets mixed in, it's going to become impure. Because it hits tameh stuff, it's going to become impure. And now you're going to have to burn or ruin, right? Destroy everything in there. The chulin is going to go to complete waste. So now the question is, you allowed to sin to save that chulin? Okay, that's what we're going to really try to figure out. But first, we're going to talk about a different scenario, which is Modeh Rabbi Eliezer v'Rabbi Yeshua. Now, the issue is like this. Can you, right now, you're standing by this wine press. The barrel starts spilling into the wine press. You want to stop it from going. So basically, you can figure out that time is of the essence because it's going to trickle down because there's a hole from the top part of the wine press that trickles down to the bottom. And in the bottom is this chulin tamei. And as soon as the truma hits, it's going to ruin it. So you want to quickly stop that wine. What's the problem? The problem is that you only have impure vessels around. So now, you're not allowed to make truma impure on purpose. So the question is, can you stick your impure bowl under, by where it's trickling out, catch whatever's coming out, but in the process, you're making the truma impure. So comes Rabbi Eliezer and he says, and Rabbi Yeshua, both of them agree. She'im yachol lahatzil mimenu revi'i b'tahara yatzil. Let's say it starts trickling down and you're about to catch it, but all you have is impure vessels. But if you run to the other side of the room or to your neighbor's house next door, you can find a pure vessel. You don't have one right there, but you can find one. But while you go find that one, what's going to happen? It's going to trickle down and ruin the chulin. But if you get back quickly, you'll be able to save at least a revid of that truma. If that's a quarter log, that won't be ruined. If you can save just a quarter log, this isn't important for our purposes, really. It's just building up to our case. If you can save a quarter log, then you can't put it in a truma vessel. You have to go run wherever it is, go get the vessel, bring it back, and save what you can. As long as there's a shiur of revid, any less than a quarter log is really insignificant, we're not going to save it. And now we're going to see, what if you can't save a quarter log? Let's say there's no pure vessels around. In lav, then we have a machlok. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, turning out Amud Bet, tered v'titma va'al yitamenu biyad. Go down and purify it. In other words, basically, okay, titma, ruin it. Let it become tameh, va'al yitamenu biyad. In other words, tered meaning let it trickle down by itself. You don't touch anything. Okay, Rabbi Eliezer says you can't sin. You can't make that truma impure. So there's nothing you could do. Don't put it in a vessel and save, right? Save some of it above or save all of it above in a truma vessel and save your chulin. No, you can't save your chulin. Just let it go. Okay. If you don't do anything, then you're not guilty. Okay. Now it's true. You're going to lose all your chulin according to him, but no choice. Okay. Because you can't make truma impure on purpose. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, Afi Tamena B'Yad. Rabbi Yeshua says, and this is what's important for our purposes, we're going to see, with two things, you have truma, which you're basically allowed to sin with in order to prevent it from getting to your chulin. He allows you to put it all in that vessel you have. Stop the wine from going in. Don't let the truma trickle down at all. Make it impure. And in that way, you save the chulin. So what do you see? Two different things, truma, chulin, and we allow you to sin with one to save the other. So why did you say when Rabbi Hanina Tirata limited his heter, why did he do that? He didn't have to. Theoretically, you could learn from here. To which the Gemara says, no, you can't learn from here. Because Shanei Hatam de l'truma ka'azla. We're going to allow you to make this truma impure to save the chulin. Why? Because even if you don't make it impure, it's going to become impure anyway. So what's the difference whether you did it by hand, right? You did it by yourself, or it happened anyway. So therefore, better to minimize damages. Be active about it. It doesn't bother us, right? Exactly the opposite of what Rabbi Eliezer said. Just don't do anything yourself. As long as you don't do it, it's not your fault. And, you can't get involved in making truma impure. But Rabbi Yeshua says, no, you can. And you should, because that will save the chulin. Okay? So that's not a good example. It has to do with our case, because even though they're two different things, in the end, it was going to become impure anyway. So you're really not doing anything wrong. Okay? Again, this is I would think, a philosophical debate. If you stand by and watch something go wrong and don't prevent it, is that kind of the same as doing it yourself or not? Right? Rabbi Eliezer thinks it's not the same as doing it yourself. Better to just stand by silently, don't do anything. Rabbi Yeshua says, look, it's all one and the same. It's going to become impure anyway, so you may as well save your chulin. Okay, Ki'ata Rav Yitzchak Tani. When Rav Yitzchak came, he brought the following braita. Okay, so we started with our case just to review a little. 2 kvasim with 4 chalot. We dealt with that case. And then, the solution in the braita, does it go only according to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, or also according to Rabbi? We compared it also to this other opinion of Rabbi Yochanan with the chalot of the Toda. Then we had this braita of Rabbi Hanina Tirata about 4 sheep with 2 loaves, the opposite case. Now, Rabbi Yitzchak's going to bring a braita. Kivsei atzeret sheshachatan shelo kemitzvatan. If you slaughtered the kivsei atzeret not properly. So Rashi says either we mean, okay, this first lashon seems to prefer it is shelo lishma. Okay, you did it shelo lishma, the sake of the wrong korban. And some people think it's the wrong age. Okay, Rashi brings a different answer that's a different explanation. It's the wrong age. Either way, let's just go with shelo lishma. Psulin v'tuabar tzuatam v'yatzu lebeit hasreifa. So they're disqualified, and you leave them. Now, what's the big problem with saying this? Remember the first Mishnah in Zvachim? Chatat and Pesach Bismano. Those are the only ones that are disqualified if you do them shelo lishma. Here comes Rav Yitzchak and says, also the kivsei atzeret, if you do them shelo lishma, they're psulim, they're disqualified. and to abar tzuratam, which is a little bit of a question, why then do you have to wait till to abar tzuratam if they're really disqualified? They should just right away get burned, okay, and they're ruined. But that's a side point that some commentaries grapple with. Let's just leave it at that, though. But this seems to be adding to the list, okay? How can you do that if it was very clear? Well, maybe because this is a unique case of shlamim. They didn't want to give like a whole rule about shlamim when this was a very unique case. Anyway, he seems to say that if you take the go with Rashi, that it's shalol lishma, this seems to be adding another case to the list of which ones are completely disqualified. But let's put that issue aside right now, and let's understand the Gemara. So Rav Yitzchak comes from Israel, and he brings this braita that talks about the kivsei atzeret that were done shalol k'mitzvatan, let's just call it lo lishma, are disqualified. Amar of Nachman, Mar de makishlu lachatat tani psulim. Well, how did he get this? Well, there's a pasuk in Vayikra chapter 23 where it talks about the kivsei atzeret, and in that same pasuk it talks about the series imachad lachatat. So it juxtaposes in the verse the chata to the shlamim here. So we're going to say, if you compare it to the chatat, that's why we come to the conclusion it's just like a chatat. It's going to be disqualified if it's shalol lishma. But Tana debe Levi, but Rav Nachman adds though, but there's a different braita from the house of Levi. Digamar shalmei chova mishalmei nedava. He says, no, we're going to learn these shlamim are a different kind of shlamim because they're obligatory, right? Most shlamim are voluntary. But we're going to learn obligatory shlamim from voluntary shlamim. Voluntary shlamim, we know. If you do them shalol lishma, you didn't fulfill your obligation, but you can continue to bring the korban. They're kshirim. You don't burn them. Okay, and that's why he taught kshirim. Okay, Ditani Levi, as he says in the following braita, and here we're going to bring another case where he does this. It says, Ushar Shalmei Nazir. He was talking about the korbanot of the Nazir. And then it says in the other korban of the Nazir, which is the Shlamim, Sheshachatan Shalo Kemitzvatan, that was slaughtered, again, lo lishma, let's say, Shirim v'lo alu l'ba'alim l'shem chova, v'nechalim l'yom v'layla v'ein tunim lo lechem v'lo zchoa. So they're kshirim. They don't fulfill the obligation of the owner. They are eaten for a day and a night, and no bread, no zroa that goes with it. All the unique halachot of the Nazir don't go along with it. But the main point being, and this is you have to add a little bit, but also by Nazir in the pasuk, it talks about the chatat that the Nazir has to bring and the shlamim. It's also juxtaposed to a chatat, but we don't learn from shlamim to chatat. We learn from the shalmei Nazir. We learn it from a regular korban shlamim. And likewise, we're going to do the same thing by us. Okay, so we seem to have this debate between Levi, into Rav Nachman, and Rav Yitzchak, who brought this braita, about whether there's two Tannaitic opinions, whether the shalmei, the kivsei atzeret that were done shalol lishma, are they disqualified or not disqualified? So basically, now we're going to have an opinion against Rav Yitzchak. Braita. Asham ben shana, vehevi ben shtayim. What if you have an asham that's supposed to be 1 year old, and you brought a 2-year-old asham? Okay, I'll give you some background, which is the asham nazir and the asham matzorah are supposed to be 1-year-olds. The asham me'ilot and asham gzelot, those are two other kinds of ashams, supposed to be a 2-year-old. Okay, one is a sheep and one is a ram. A ram is basically a 2-year sheep. So if you have an asham ben shana and you brought a ben shtayim, or you have an asham that was supposed to be a ben shtayim and you brought hevi ben shana, psulim v'tu abar tzuratam v'yetzu lebeit hasreifa. They're disqualified. Again, same thing here. You have to wait till they get ruined, and then, right, or leave them overnight, and then they get burned. Aval olat nazir v'olat yoledet v'olat mitzora shayu b'nei shtei shanim ushchatan ksherim. But if you have an ola that was an obligatory ola, like a nazir, a yoledet, or a mitzora, a leper, then that they were supposed to be 2 years, and you brought them, the ayu b'nei shtei shanim ushchatan, they were supposed to be 1 year, and you brought a 2-year-old one, ksherim. Okay, those are fine. So the asham, you bring the wrong year, it's disqualified. The ola, it's fine. Klalo shel davar, what's the rule? Kol kasher ba'olat nedava, kasher ba'olat chova. Whatever works for a voluntary ola also works for an obligatory ola. And that's the exact same thing that Levi said about the shlamim, right? And that's why he said it's going to be ksherim, because we're going to learn one from the other. We're not going to learn it from a sin offering. We're also there, the olat nazir and the olat yoledet and the olat mitzorah are also compared in the pasuk to the chatat. So we don't do that. Okay, so that's really your difficulty. We're just going to finish about the asham. Kol pasul b'chatat, pasul b'asham, chutz mishalo lishmo. And all the disqualifications of a chatat, like for example, the age, which is disqualification, is going to also be a disqualification in the asham. other than lo lishma, which again, only according to Rabbi Eliezer, if you remember, the asham was like the chatat. But according to this opinion, no, just the issue of lo lishma, it's not, but everything else, yes. Okay, but the main point being that here you have a braita that says that the olat nedava, we're going to learn the olat chova, the obligatory ola, we're going to learn from an olat nedava. If it was done shelo lishma, it's going to be fine. Same thing that Levi did, but completely against Rav Yitzchak. To which, because Rav Yitzchak says we do the hekesh to the chata. We don't do that here. So obviously they're going to say, hi Tana de Bei Levi, who, okay, that braita is written by a Tana from the house of Levi, so don't ask a question on that. Okay, Tashma. Now we're going to have a difficulty on Rav Nachman's understanding of Levi. Ditane Levi says in a braita of Levi, Asham Nazir v'Asham Metzora sheshachatan shelo lishma. You have an Asham of a Nazir or an Asham Metzora, a leper, that you slaughtered shelo lishma, ksherim v'lo alu lebalim l'shem chova. Okay, they're fine. You didn't fulfill your obligation, but they are continued to be brought. Shchata mechusar zman bebalim. If you slaughtered them before the owner was supposed to bring it, like day 6 instead of day 8. Oh, shayu b'nei shtei shanim shesha'u shchatan psulim. Or if they were 2 years old and you slaughtered them, they're going to be disqualified. Now, what did he explain Levi saying, right? We're going to learn Shalmei Chovah from Shalmei Nedava. So in Ita, Ligmar Mishlamim. Now what he says is, why didn't we learn Asham from Shlamim? Okay, there's a bit of a strange question, okay? I'm not exactly sure why it's such a strong question. But they're saying we assume that we're going to learn the Asham from the Shlamim, and just like the Shlamim we said, if it's brought Shelo Lishman, right, and it's Kshirim, if it's Mechusar Zman, if it's the wrong year, right, we're going to accept it anyway. So why don't we learn it from Shlamim? Okay, I just want to check one thing. Right. So they say here, Ita, if Rashi says, Digamar Tana de Levi Chova Minidava, then we should learn the Asham ben Shtei Shanim from a Shlamim of Nidava. What they're basically saying is if you're going to have this model of learning Olat Chova from Olat Nidava and Olat Shlamim Chova from Shlamim Nidava, since Asham doesn't have any Nidava, there is no voluntary, but wouldn't you just assume that we learn Asham Chova from a Shalmei Nidava? That's what we would assume you would learn. And Shlamim Nidava can come with a 2-year-old animal. So even though this Asham is supposed to be 1 year and you brought it from a 2-year, it should still be valid. To which the Gemara answers, no. Okay, this is what you would have thought. Shlamim Mishlamim Gamar, Asham Mishlamim Lo Gamar. No, Levi learns Asham from Asham, not from Shlamim. In other words, he would say, Shlamim from Shlamim is learned. That was his whole theory. We're going to learn this case of the Shalmei Chova, the Shalmei Atzeret, from a regular Shlamim. But we're not going to learn Asham from Shlamim, because there's no reason to think that. V'i Gamar Shlamim Mishlamim, Ligmar Nami Asham Asham. So wait, now, this I accidentally said it before. I wasn't really supposed to. At the first point they're making here is don't try to say we should have learned Asham from Shlamim, because only Shlamim is learned from Shlamim. Shalmei Chova, obligatory ones, from voluntary ones. But Asham, that's an obligation. We're not going to learn from Shlamim. It's voluntary. So I said, okay, fine. We won't learn that, but at least we should learn Asham from Asham. And then what? What did we say here? If you bring an Asham the wrong age, it's disqualified. But now they say, remember what I told you, there's 2 types of Asham. Some need 1 year and some need a 2-year animal, right? The Nazir and the Metzora need a 1 year. And the Me'ila and Gzelot, Asham Gzelot, need a 2-year. So now they say, well, Ligmar Nami, Igam or Shlamim Mishlamim, if he's going to learn something from Shlamim, he should learn Asham from Asham. Ligmar Nami Asham Asham. To which they say, right, this is what he should learn. Asham Nazir, Asham Metzora, Asham Gzelot, Asham Elot, or Asham Gzelot, Asham Elot, Asham Nazir, Asham Metzora. Either which one you bring the wrong year, it should be fine because the other type can be brought from the other year. So, right, a different age animal. So it should all be fine. But Amar Rav Shimi Barashi, Rav Shimi Barashi, no. Even if you're Levi, you're not going to learn it that way. Why? Because Danim Davao, Shalo Behechshero, Midavar Shalo Behechshero. What did we say we're going to learn? We're going to learn a Shlamim. What was our whole original limud of Levi? If you brought a Shlamim Shalo Lishman, it's a voluntary one. You did it wrong, but it's valid anyway. So we'll say the same thing for the obligatory Shlamim. That's davar that was done improperly. We're going to learn it from something else that was done improperly. We're comparing 2 equal things. But ein danim davar shelo be'hechshero midavar shebechshero. But if you take an Asham Nazir that's supposed to be a 1-year-old animal, and you bring a 2-year-old animal, we're not going to say, oh, look, but since the Asham Elot is supposed to be a 2-year animal, so that when it's done properly, it's a 2-year animal. So we'll say when this one's done improperly, we'll accept it as well. That's not the kind of drasha that Levi was doing. Levi was trying to say, if you do it wrong, it's fine. Well, then we'll say the same thing also for the obligatory one. But he's not going to say learn Asham from Asham when it's done. One case is done properly and the other it's done improperly. We're not going to learn improper from proper. Okay, so with that, we finish that section. And then we have one more question here. Velo, wait, really? We can't learn davar shelo be'hechshero mi davar shebechshero? You can't learn something that was done improperly from something that was done properly? How about this case? V'hatanya minayin liyotze. If something left the temple, the azara, the courtyard walls, she'im ala lo yered. How do you know that if it went on the altar, you leave it on? Okay, meaning it shouldn't have gone on the altar because it was disqualified. But if you put it on anyway, okay, we saw this many times in Tzvachim, and we saw this also actually. Sharei yotze kasher b'bama. Why? Because yotze is not a disqualification in the time of bamot. So what do you see here? We're learning something that's done improperly. You took it out of the courtyard when there was a temple and it was forbidden to be outside. You put it outside and then you brought it back on the altar. It's going to stay because in a time when things were permitted to be outside, well, there's no problem being outside because it's completely permitted. So because it could be outside certain times when there's no central temple, so we'll allow it here as well, which is a complete, right? That's a case of you're learning from something that was done properly, you're learning to something that was done wrong. So you can do that. To which, you might remember this or not, but we'll just finish from the top of the next daf. Tana azot Torah ta'olah riba samichle. In the end, that's not really where they learn it from. Okay, they suggest learning it from there, but in the end, they learn it from a drasha. The reason why, if you put something that was yotze on the altar, you leave it on, was a drasha on the pasuk zot Torah ta'olah. From there, they learned something that went up. Olah means it goes up. Something that went up on the altar, you actually get to keep on the altar. And they don't really learn it from the Bama case. So really, you don't learn Davar Shelo Bechshero from something Shebechshero. Okay, with that, we finished today's daf. We'll do a quick review. We started with the case of the 2 sheep with the 4. Right, we reviewed that already. Then with the 4 loaves. Then we did the 4 sheep with the 2 loaves. And what we do in that situation, right, that we basically start doing according to the Braita of Rabbi Chanina, you take 2. You do them Shelo Lishma, and then you do the other 2 lishma, and you can't do the reverse order because then they've already been rejected. Rabbi Yochanan didn't like that. He said, how could we have someone do something wrong in the first place, right? And he didn't like that, but basically Rabbi Chanina said, no, you really can, right? As long as he limited it, as long as they're 2 of the same type, right? Which then the Gemara questioned that, really. Even if they're different types, it seems to work with the Trum and Chulin. We said, no, that didn't count. And also the fact that he said, right, he went against Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan tried to say, how can you even say that in the same type it works? Look at the Kivsei Atzeret with right on Shabbat, and then we said no, that's because it's Shabbat for after Shabbat. That's why we don't allow it. But normally, for the same item, we would allow you to sin, and that's why Rabbi Chanina says you really can do this here. Then we got to the Kivsei Atzeret that you did Shelo Lishma, and then we had this machloket. Do we learn the Kivsei Atzeret from the Chatat, and it's disqualified? Or do we learn Kivsei Atzeret from the Shalmei Nedava, from the Shalmei Chova, from the Shalmei Nedava, which are, of course, accepted, right? Because the Shlamim Shelo Lishma works. So that was the 2 approaches of Levi versus Rav Yitzchak, and then we had a difficulty on Rav Yitzchak, and then we had a difficulty on Levi, or Rav Nachman's understanding of Levi, which then we worked out, and with that we finished basically our daf. So wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and Shavua Tov.